The stagecoach rattled violently as it hit another rut in the road, jostling Bridget Adams awake from her fitful slumber. Ash Fork, Arizona, 1878, her destination and hopefully her salvation was just beyond the next ridge according to the driver's earlier promise. She dabbed at the perspiration on her brow with a handkerchief that had long since lost its pristine white color to the dust of the trail. The summer heat was unrelenting, pressing against the coach like a physical force determined to crush her already fragile spirit. Bridget had never imagined that, at 26 years of age, she would be traveling alone across the frontier to a town where she knew not a soul. But Philadelphia had become unbearable after her parents' passing and the subsequent collapse of her father's modest bookkeeping business. The whispers and stares that had always followed her substantial figure had grown more pronounced without her father's protective presence. Final stop coming up, folks. Ash Fork, Arizona territory. The driver called down, his voice barely audible over the creaking wood and thundering hooves. Bridget smoothed her travel dress, a practical navy blue affair that did little to flatter her generous proportions. Her corset dug painfully into her flesh, but she'd cinched it as tightly as propriety and her breathing would allow. First impressions were important, especially for a woman traveling alone to take up a position as the town's new schoolteacher. The only other passengers, a weathered miner and his rail, thin wife, barely acknowledged her as they gathered their meager possessions. Bridget had grown accustomed to being overlooked, or worse, becoming the subject of pitying glances and cruel jokes about her size. She squared her shoulders resolutely. Ash Fork would be different. It had to be. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the town's main street, and Bridget took her first real look at her new home. Ash Fork was larger than she'd imagined from the advertisement seeking a schoolteacher. A proper main street stretched before her, lined with wooden buildings in various stages of weather-beaten decay. The Wells Fargo office, a general store, a saloon that seemed to be doing brisk business despite the early hour, and farther down, she could make out what must be the schoolhouse, a modest but solid structure with a small bell tower. "Need help with your bags, madam?" the driver asked, already tossing down her two heavy trunks with little concern for their contents. "Thank you, but," Bridget began, but the driver had already moved on to assist the miner's wife, a woman whose fragile appearance apparently warranted more gallantry than Bridget's substantial frame. Bridget sighed and awkwardly descended from the coach, feeling the eyes of passers-by upon her as her feet hit the dusty ground. She was used to this moment, the inevitable assessment of her size, the quick flicker of surprise or distaste that crossed strangers' faces before they politely averted their gaze. "You must be Miss Adams," a stern voice announced, and Bridget turned to face a tall, angular woman with iron-gray hair pulled back so severely that it seemed to stretch the skin of her face. "I'm Mrs. Holcomb, head of the school board. We've been expecting you." "Yes, madam." "Thank you for meeting me," Bridget replied, extending her hand, which Mrs. Holcomb grasped briefly with cool fingers. "I trust your journey was uneventful," Mrs. Holcomb said, though her tone suggested she cared little for the answer. Her eyes had already completed their evaluation of Bridget, lingering just a moment too long on her waistline before returning to her face. "Quite uneventful, thank you," Bridget answered, fighting the urge to cross her arms over her midsection. "Very good. The boarding house is prepared for your arrival. Mrs. Garner is a fair landlady, though she expects punctuality at mealtimes." Mrs. Holcomb glanced meaningfully at Bridget's figure again, a small frown creasing her thin lips. "I'm sure that won't be an issue for you." Bridget felt heat creep up her neck, a familiar shame washing over her. "No, madam," she murmured, wishing the ground would open up and swallow her whole. "Your trunks, miss." A deep voice interrupted, and Bridget turned gratefully toward the sound. The man before her stood tall in the blazing Arizona sun, his broad shoulders nearly blocking out the light. His face was partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see a strong jawline dusted with stubble and eyes the color of a summer storm. He wore the practical garb of a working cowboy, worn leather chaps over denim trousers, a simple cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled to expose sun-bronzed forearms, and a bandana tied loosely at his neck. "I'm Nathan Finley," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect that revealed thick, dark hair in need of a trim. "Town's deputy, among other things. Mayor asked me to help get you settled." "I can manage the introductions, Mr. Finley," Mrs. Holcomb interjected with a hint of irritation. "Miss Adams, this is our deputy. He occasionally assists with school maintenance and other odd jobs when Sheriff Blackburn doesn't require his services." Nathan nodded politely to Mrs. Holcomb but kept his attention on Bridget. "Those trunks look mighty heavy, Miss Adams. Let me help you with them." Before Bridget could protest, he effortlessly hoisted both trunks, one under each arm, as if they contained nothing more than feathers instead of her entire life's possessions. "Mrs. Garner's boarding house is just down the way," he said, nodding toward a two-story white clapboard structure at the far end of the street. "I'll walk with you if that's all right." "The school board meeting is tomorrow at 4 o'clock, Miss Adams," Mrs. Holcomb said. "We'll review your duties and expectations then. Good day." With a curt nod, she turned and walked away, her back as rigid as an ironing board. Left alone with the deputy, Bridget felt suddenly self-conscious. Nathan Finley was undeniably handsome in a rugged, frontier way, and walking beside his tall, lean frame would only accentuate her own substantial proportions. "Shall we?" he asked, his voice lacking any trace of the judgment or pity she'd come to expect. "You really don't need to trouble yourself, Deputy Finley," Bridget said, reaching for one of her trunks. "I'm quite capable, no doubt you are, Miss Adams," he replied with a smile that creased the corners of his eyes. "But my mother would tan my hide, even at my age, if she heard I let a lady struggle with her baggage. And please, it's just Nathan." Bridget found herself returning his smile, albeit hesitantly. "Then I'm Bridget, not Miss Adams, at least when Mrs. Holcomb isn't around." Nathan chuckled, a warm, rich sound that seemed to ease some of the tension in Bridget's shoulders. "Mrs. Holcomb takes her position on the school board very seriously. Don't let her intimidate you. The children of Ash Fork need a teacher with a kind heart more than they need another drill sergeant." As they walked down the main street, Bridget became acutely aware of the curious glances from the townspeople. A new arrival always generated interest in small western towns, but she knew her size added another dimension to their scrutiny. She kept her gaze fixed ahead, her spine straight despite the discomfort of her too-tight corset. "Ash Fork's grown considerable in the last few years," Nathan was saying, apparently oblivious to her discomfort or politely ignoring it. "Started as just a watering stop for the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad, but with the silver mine opening up in the hills and more settlers coming west, we're becoming a proper town. Even got a doctor now, though he doubles as the undertaker, which isn't the most reassuring combination." Bridget laughed despite herself. "I suppose it's efficient if his patients don't recover." Nathan's eyes widened for a moment before he let out a hearty laugh. "Miss Adams, Bridget, I think you'll fit in just fine here." The way he said it, as if her belonging was a foregone conclusion rather than a desperate hope, warmed something inside her that had been cold for a very long time. Mrs. Garner's boarding house was modest but well-maintained, with a wide porch adorned with several rocking chairs and pots of hardy geraniums struggling against the Arizona heat. Nathan set the trunks down on the porch and opened the door for Bridget, the small bell above it announcing their arrival. The interior was mercifully cool and smelled of fresh bread and lemon polish. A plump woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked dark hair emerged from the back, wiping her hands on her apron. "You must be our new schoolteacher," she exclaimed, her smile genuine as she took in Bridget's travel-weary appearance without a hint of judgment. "I'm Eliza Garner. Welcome to Ash Fork, dear. You're just in time for lunch." "Thank you, Mrs. Garner. I'm Bridget Adams." She turned to Nathan, who hovered respectfully in the doorway. "And thank you, Deputy, for your assistance." "My pleasure," he said, replacing his hat. "I'm sure our paths will cross again soon, Miss Adams. Ash Fork isn't known for its vast distances." With a tip of his hat and another of those warm smiles that seemed to reach all the way to his storm-gray eyes, he was gone, leaving Bridget with the strange sensation that her heart had forgotten its proper rhythm. Mrs. Garner's voice broke through her thoughts. "Deputy Finley's a good man. Lost his wife and child to fever 3 years back. Threw himself into work after that deputy ranch hand, whatever needed doing. Town wouldn't function half as well without him." She gave Bridget an appraising look. "Now, let me show you to your room and then you can join us for lunch. The other boarders are curious to meet the woman brave enough to take on Ash Fork's children." As Bridget followed Mrs. Garner up the narrow staircase, she wondered what exactly she had gotten herself into. But for the first time since stepping off the stagecoach, she felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps Ash Fork could indeed be different. Perhaps here, she could finally be judged by the quality of her character and her abilities as a teacher, rather than the size of her waistline. The room Mrs. Garner showed her to was simple but comfortable, a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin, a small writing desk beneath the window that overlooked the main street, and a wardrobe for her clothing. It wasn't luxurious by any means, but after weeks of travel, it looked like paradise to Bridget's weary eyes. "Rest a bit if you like, dear," Mrs. Garner said. "Lunch is at noon sharp, but there's no shame in taking a moment to catch your breath after such a journey." Left alone, Bridget sank onto the edge of the bed, the frame creaking slightly beneath her weight. She winced at the sound, a familiar reminder of her size. Unbuttoning the high collar of her travel dress, she allowed herself to breathe more freely. The desert air, even indoors, was drier than she was accustomed to, and she found herself reaching for her canteen through the window. She caught a glimpse of Nathan Finley striding back down the street, his long-legged gait purposeful. She watched as he paused to help an elderly man load a barrel into a wagon, the muscles in his back and shoulders evident even through his cotton shirt. There was something compelling about him beyond his handsome features, a quiet strength and dignity that she found herself drawn to despite her best intentions. Bridget shook her head, chastising herself for such foolish thoughts. Men like Nathan Finley didn't look twice at women like her, no matter how kind their manner might be. She had come to Ash Fork to teach, to make a life for herself away from the painful memories and constant judgment of Philadelphia society. Romance had no place in her plans. With a sigh, she began to unpack her most immediate necessities, a fresh blouse, her hairbrush, and the small frame containing a daguerreotype of her parents. She placed the latter on the nightstand, seeking comfort in their familiar faces as she prepared to face the curious scrutiny of the boarding house residents. The dinner bell rang precisely at noon, its cheerful peal summoning Bridget downstairs to a large dining room where a table was set for 8. Mrs. Garner bustled about, placing a steaming tureen of soup at the center of the table while a young girl, perhaps 16 or 17, arranged thick slices of bread on a platter. "Ah, Miss Adams," Mrs. Garner beamed. "This is my daughter, Hannah. She helps me run the place." Hannah, a pretty girl with her mother's dark hair and a scattering of freckles across her nose, offered a shy smile. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Adams. I'm ever so excited to have a real teacher in town. I've been helping with the little ones, but I've no proper training." "I'm sure you've done admirably," Bridget replied warmly, immediately liking the girl's unaffected manner. The other boarders began to file in. Mr. Peterson, the telegraph operator, a thin man with spectacles who spoke in the same clipped rhythm as his Morse code. Mrs. Winters, a widow who ran the millinery shop, and the Reverend Thomas Clark and his wife Sarah, who greeted Bridget with genuine warmth. "We're so pleased you've come, Miss Adams," Reverend Clark said. "The children need structure and education if Ash Fork is to grow into a proper community." "Our son Charlie is 8, Sarah added. "He's been absolutely wild with excitement since we heard a teacher was coming. He's got a mind like a steel trap, remembers everything he hears." As they took their seats, Bridget noticed that the chair provided for her was subtly larger and sturdier than the others, a thoughtful accommodation from Mrs. Garner that brought both gratitude and embarrassment. She lowered herself carefully, relieved when the chair received her weight without protest. Conversation flowed easily around the table as Mrs. Garner's hearty potato soup and fresh bread were passed around. Bridget found herself answering questions about Philadelphia, her training as a teacher, and what had brought her west. "My parents passed away last year," she explained, careful to keep her voice steady. "There was little left for me in Philadelphia. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Arizona Territory, it seemed like a sign." "A brave decision coming all this way alone," Mrs. Winters commented, her eyes kind. Bridget smiled faintly. "Perhaps, or perhaps just a necessary one." "Well, we're mighty glad you made it," Mr. Peterson said. "Those children need someone with formal education. Been running half wild since Miss Johnson left to get married last spring." "How many students should I expect?" Bridget asked, grateful for the shift to professional matters. "About 30, ranging from 6 to 16, Reverend Clark replied. "Some only come when they can be spared from ranch work or household duties. The Dia's children ride in 5 miles each way when the weather permits." "The school building is sound," Mrs. Garner added. "The town council made sure of that. New desks, too, though the books are a bit outdated." "Deputy Finley repaired the roof just last month," Hannah chimed in, her cheeks coloring slightly at the mention of his name. "And he built new shelves for the school supplies." Bridget felt an irrational pang at the girl's obvious admiration for Nathan. Of course, a young, pretty thing like Hannah would harbor feelings for the handsome deputy. What surprised her was her own reaction, a flicker of something that felt dangerously like jealousy. The conversation moved on to town gossip and plans for the upcoming Harvest Festival, with Bridget content to listen and learn more about her new community. By the time apple pie was served for dessert, she felt cautiously optimistic about her new home. "School board meeting tomorrow at 4, isn't that right?" Mrs. Winters asked as they were finishing their meal. Bridget nodded. "Yes, Mrs. Holcomb was quite clear about that." A knowing look passed around the table, making Bridget curious. "Martha Holcomb is dedicated," Reverend Clark said diplomatically. "She's a dragon in human form," Mrs. Winters said less diplomatically, then immediately looked contrite. "Forgive me, Reverend, that was unchristian of me." The Reverend's eyes twinkled. "Even Jesus lost his temper with the money changers, Mrs. Winters. I believe he might understand your feelings about Mrs. Holcomb." Laughter rippled around the table, and Bridget found herself joining in, the tension of her arrival day finally easing from her shoulders after helping clear the dishes despite Mrs. Garner's protests that guests shouldn't work on their first day. Bridget decided to venture out to see the schoolhouse. The afternoon heat had intensified, making her wish she'd brought a parasol as she made her way down the dusty Main Street. The schoolhouse sat on a small rise at the edge of town, a simple wooden structure with a bell tower that gleamed in the harsh sunlight. A split-rail fence enclosed a yard where, Bridget imagined, children would play during their lunch hour. The door was unlocked, as was common in small towns where theft was rare and community trust high. The interior was dim and sweltering, the windows shut tight against the dust. Bridget moved through the space, taking inventory 24 desks arranged in neat rows, a larger desk at the front for herself, a blackboard that had seen better days but was serviceable, and the bookshelves Nathan had built, currently holding a modest collection of worn textbooks. She ran her finger along one shelf, noting both the sturdy craftsmanship and the layer of dust that had accumulated. There was work to be done before classes began on Monday, but the basics were sound. She could make this work. The sound of boots on the wooden steps outside startled her, and she turned to find Nathan Finley filling the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the bright light. "Pardon the interruption," he said, removing his hat as he stepped inside. "Saw you heading this way and thought you might want the key." He held up a brass key. "Town council asked me to bring it to you." "Thank you," Bridget said, taking the key, careful not to let their fingers touch. "I wanted to see what I was working with before tomorrow's meeting." Nathan nodded, glancing around the room. "It's a good space. Needs a woman's touch, though. And a thorough cleaning," Bridget added with a small smile. "Did you really build these shelves?" "Yes, madam. Not much to look at, but they'll hold whatever books you've got." "They're perfect," she assured him. "Sturdy and practical. I appreciate craftsmanship that values function over ornate flourishes." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or approval. "Most women I know prefer the flourishes." "I'm not most women," Bridget replied, then immediately wished she could take back the words. They sounded like flirtation, which was certainly not her intention, but Nathan didn't seem to take them that way. He merely nodded, his expression thoughtful. "No, I don't believe you are, Miss Adams." An awkward silence fell between them, filled only by the distant sounds of the town and the persistent buzz of flies against the window panes. "Well," Bridget said finally, "I should get back to the boarding house. I've preparations to make before tomorrow's meeting." "Allow me to walk with you," Nathan offered. "The sun's fierce today, and you don't have a hat." Bridget hesitated, torn between her ingrained wariness of male attention and the practical consideration that the Arizona sun was indeed merciless on her fair skin. "If it's not too much trouble." "No trouble at all," he assured her, holding the door open. As they walked back toward town, Bridget was acutely conscious of the contrast they must present, his tall, lean frame beside her much shorter, much wider one. In Philadelphia, such a pairing would have invited stares and whispers. She braced herself for the same here, but the few townspeople they passed merely nodded in greeting, their expressions curious but not unkind. Nathan tipped his hat to the ladies and exchanged brief words with the men, introducing Bridget as our new schoolteacher with a note of pride in his voice, as if her presence were something the whole town should celebrate. "Have you always been a teacher?" he asked as they neared the boarding house. "I assisted at my father's school in Philadelphia," she replied. "He ran a small academy for young ladies. When he passed, the new owner had different ideas about who should teach the girls." Nathan's brow furrowed. "Different ideas." Bridget hesitated, then decided honesty was best. He preferred teachers whose appearance would attract wealthy parents. I did not fit his image of what a proper instructor should look like. Understanding dawned in Nathan's eyes, followed quickly by indignation. That's downright foolish. What does appearance have to do with teaching ability? In Philadelphia society, everything. Bridget's tone was matter-of-fact, without self-pity. Appearances matter greatly there. Well, they matter a sight less in Ash Fork, Nathan said firmly. Out here, we judge folk by what they can do, not how they look doing it. The simple statement, delivered without artifice, touched something deep in Bridget's heart. She'd heard similar sentiments before, of course, usually from well-meaning relatives or friends trying to console her after some slight or rejection. But from Nathan's lips, the words rang with authentic conviction. They had reached the boarding house, and Bridget paused at the bottom of the steps. "Thank you for the escort, Deputy Finley." "Nathan," he corrected with a gentle smile. "And you're welcome, Bridget." He hesitated, then added, "The council's holding a welcome supper for you Saturday evening at the church hall. Whole town will be there. Thought you might like to know so you can prepare." Bridget felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of being the center of attention. "That's very kind of them." "It's also practical," Nathan said with a wink. "Gives everyone a chance to size you up before they send their children to you on Monday." His honesty was refreshing, and Bridget found herself laughing. "Well, there's plenty to size up, as you can see." The words slipped out before she could stop them, a preemptive strike born of years of painful experience. But rather than joining in her self-deprecation or offering awkward reassurances, Nathan's expression grew serious. "What I see," he said quietly, "is a woman brave enough to travel across the country alone to teach strangers' children. That says more about you than anything else could." Before Bridget could formulate a response to such unexpected kindness, he tipped his hat once more and turned to go. "Until tomorrow, Miss Adams." Bridget watched him walk away, his long strides carrying him quickly down the street. Only when he had disappeared around a corner did she realize she was clutching the schoolhouse key so tightly that it had left an impression in her palm. That night, as she lay in her narrow bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a frontier town settling into darkness, Bridget tried to make sense of her turbulent emotions. She had come to Ash Fork seeking a fresh start, a place where she might be valued for her mind rather than judged for her body. She had not come looking for the unsettling warmth that spread through her chest whenever Nathan Finley looked at her with those serious gray eyes. It was foolishness, she told herself firmly. Schoolgirl fantasy. Men like Nathan, handsome, capable, respected, did not truly see women like her. His kindness was just that kindness, perhaps mixed with pity. To imagine anything else would only lead to heartache. Bridget turned onto her side, pulling the quilt up despite the lingering heat of the day trapped in her small room. Tomorrow would bring the school board meeting and the beginning of her real work in Ash Fork. That's where her focus needed to be, on building a life of purpose and independence, not on misinterpreting the common courtesy of a handsome deputy. But as sleep finally claimed her, it was Nathan's words that echoed in her mind. "What I see is a woman brave enough." Morning arrived with the sounds of a bustling boarding house, the clanking of pots in the kitchen below, the creaking of floorboards as the other residents moved about their rooms, and the distant call of a rooster announcing the sun's appearance. Bridget dressed carefully in her best day dress, a deep green cotton with covered buttons down the front and lace at the collar. It was modest and professional, though like all her clothing, it strained slightly at the seams despite the dressmaker's best efforts. Breakfast was a lively affair, with Mrs. Garner's fresh biscuits and gravy drawing appreciative murmurs from everyone at the table. Bridget ate sparingly, conscious of the eyes that might judge each bite she took, though no one at the boarding house seemed inclined to scrutinize her plate. "Will you be visiting the schoolhouse again today, Miss Adams?" Hannah asked, refilling Bridget's coffee cup. "Yes, I'd like to start cleaning and organizing before the meeting this afternoon," Bridget replied. "First impressions are important, especially with Mrs. Holcomb." Mrs. Winters snorted delicately. "Martha Holcomb had her first impression of you the moment she received your application letter. Nothing you do today will change it." "Now, Harriet," Reverend Clark admonished gently, "we must give everyone the benefit of the doubt." "I've given Martha Holcomb 20 years of doubt," Mrs. Winters retorted. "And in all that time, she's never surprised me by being kinder than expected." Bridget tried to hide her amusement behind her coffee cup. "Well, I still intend to present myself and my plans for the school in the best possible light." "That's the spirit," Mrs. Garner said approvingly. "I've packed you a lunch to take along. Can't have you facing Martha on an empty stomach." After breakfast, Bridget gathered the cleaning supplies Mrs. Garner kindly provided and made her way back to the schoolhouse. The morning was marginally cooler than the previous day, a slight breeze offering occasional relief from the relentless sun. The schoolhouse looked different in the morning light, less daunting, more full of possibility. Bridget opened all the windows, allowing fresh air to circulate through the stuffy room. Then she set to work with a determination born of necessity. The floors needed sweeping. The desks required dusting and arranging, the blackboard needed a thorough washing, and the few books on the shelves had to be organized by subject and level. She worked steadily through the morning, removing her outer bodice as the heat intensified, working in her chemise and corset despite the impropriety. There was no one to see her after all, and the coolness was worth the breach of decorum. By midday, sweat dampened her hair and dress, and her back ached from bending to scrub the floor, but the transformation was remarkable. The wood gleamed with lemon oil, the windows sparkled in the sunlight, and the desk stood in neat rows facing a clean blackboard. Bridget had even found a vase in a cupboard and picked some hardy wildflowers from behind the schoolhouse to brighten her desk. She was so absorbed in arranging the flowers that she didn't hear the approaching footsteps until a shadow fell across the doorway. "Miss Adams." Bridget whirled around, mortified to be caught in her state of dishevelment. Nathan Finley stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he took in her appearance, hair escaping its pins, sleeves rolled up to her elbows, cheeks flushed with exertion. "Deputy Finley," she exclaimed, hastily grabbing for her discarded bodice. "I didn't expect anyone to, that is, I was just turning this place into a proper schoolhouse," he finished for her, his voice warm with approval. "It looks like a different room entirely." Bridget fumbled with the buttons of her bodice, her fingers clumsy with embarrassment. "I wanted it to be presentable for the school board meeting." Nathan stepped inside, setting a small crate on one of the student desks. "Well, you've certainly succeeded. Mrs. Holcomb will be hard-pressed to find fault, though I'm sure she'll manage somehow." The dry humor in his voice made Bridget smile despite her embarrassment. "You don't think highly of our school board president." "I think highly of her dedication," Nathan replied diplomatically. "It's her methods I sometimes question," he gestured to the crate. "I brought those primers the council ordered. They arrived on today's stage." "Oh, thank you." Bridget moved to examine the books, grateful for the distraction from her disheveled state. "These will be perfect for the younger children. The existing readers are far too advanced for beginners." Nathan watched her as she leafed through one of the primers, her enthusiasm evident. "You really care about teaching, don't you?" Bridget looked up, surprised by the question. "Of course. It's not just a job, it's a calling." Every child deserves the chance to learn, to expand their mind beyond their immediate circumstances. She trailed off, suddenly self-conscious about her fervor. I apologize. I tend to get carried away when discussing education. No need to apologize for passion, Miss Adams. There was something in his gaze that made her heart flutter uncomfortably. It's refreshing. An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by the distant barking of a dog somewhere in town. I should let you get back to your preparations, Nathan said finally. The meeting's at 4, correct? Bridget nodded, still clutching the primer to her chest like a shield. Then I'll see you there. He turned to go, then paused. You might want to have some water before the meeting. It's easy to get parched in this heat, especially when you're working hard. The simple concern in his voice touched her. Thank you, I will. After he left, Bridget sank into her chair, her composure slipping. What was wrong with her? She was a grown woman, a professional educator, not some silly girl to be flustered by a man's attention. Yet something about Nathan Finley's direct gaze and quiet presence unsettled her in ways she couldn't quite understand. She shook her head, forcing her thoughts back to the task at hand. The school board meeting was mere hours away, and she still needed to organize her teaching materials and review her proposed curriculum. There was no time for foolish daydreams. By 3:45, Bridget had changed into a fresh shirtwaist, tidied her hair, and assembled her materials for the meeting. She arrived at the town hall, a modest building adjacent to the sheriff's office, precisely on time, only to discover that the entire school board was already present and waiting. Mrs. Holcomb sat at the head of a long table, flanked by Mr. Jenkins, the owner of the general store, Dr. Lansing, the town's physician/undertaker, and Mayor Wallace, a portly man with impressive mutton chop whiskers. To Bridget's surprise, Nathan was also present, standing at the back of the room. "Ah, Miss Adams," Mrs. Holcomb said, consulting the watch pinned to her severe black dress. "Right on time. We appreciate punctuality in our educators." "Thank you for meeting with me," Bridget said, taking the sole empty chair across from the board members. She was acutely aware of Nathan's presence behind her, though she carefully avoided looking in his direction. "We've reviewed your credentials," Mayor Wallace began genially. "Most impressive for someone of your youth." Bridget smiled politely, choosing to focus on the compliment rather than the hesitation in his voice. "Thank you, Mayor Wallace. I was fortunate to receive excellent training at my father's academy." "Yes, well," Mrs. Holcomb interjected, "credentials on paper are one thing. Practical application is quite another. Our children are not Philadelphia society girls, Miss Adams. They are frontier children, many from hard-working ranch families. They need practical education, not fancy Eastern notions." "I couldn't agree more, Mrs. Holcomb," Bridget replied, deliberately keeping her tone respectful. "While I believe in maintaining high academic standards, I understand that the curriculum must be adapted to meet the needs of the community." She opened the folder she had brought, removing several sheets of paper. "I've taken the liberty of drafting a proposed curriculum that balances fundamental skills, reading, writing, arithmetic, with practical applications relevant to life in Arizona territory." She passed the papers to the board members, who began examining them with varying degrees of interest. "I see you've included agricultural science," Dr. Lansing commented, looking up from the papers with approval, "and basic medical care, very sensible." "And local history," Mayor Wallace added. "Good, good. Children should know about their own land." Mrs. Holcomb's lips thinned as she scanned the document, clearly searching for something to criticize. "This is all very ambitious, Miss Adams. We have limited resources." "I'm aware of that, madam," Bridget responded. That's why I've designed many of the lessons to utilize natural materials and the environment itself as teaching tools. Learning doesn't require expensive equipment, it requires creativity and dedication. From the corner of her eye, Bridget caught a glimpse of Nathan shifting his weight, and she thought she detected a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Mr. Jenkins, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. "Miss Adams, forgive my bluntness, but there's another matter we must address. Teaching in a frontier town can be physically demanding. The children can be energetic. Some of the older boys, particularly, can be challenging to control, given your physical condition." Bridget felt heat rise to her face, but she kept her expression composed. "If you're referring to my size, Mr. Jenkins, I assure you it has never hindered my ability to manage a classroom. In fact, I find that clear expectations and engaging lessons do far more to maintain discipline than physical intimidation ever could." Mayor Wallace looked uncomfortable, but Dr. Lansing nodded thoughtfully. "Well said, Miss Adams." Mrs. Holcomb, however, was not so easily satisfied. "That remains to be seen. Some of these ranch boys are nearly grown men. They won't take kindly to being ordered about by a what, Mrs. Holcomb?" Nathan's voice came from the back of the room, quiet but firm. "By a highly educated woman who's traveled across the country to teach their children. I'd imagine most parents would be grateful." Mrs. Holcomb's cheeks colored slightly. "Deputy Finley, this is a school board matter. Your input, while appreciated, is not required." "Actually," Mayor Wallace interjected, "Deputy Finley is here at my request as our law enforcement representative. Children's education affects the entire community, including matters of public order." An awkward silence fell over the room, broken finally by Dr. Lansing. "I move that we accept Miss Adams' proposed curriculum and allow her to begin teaching on Monday as planned. We can reassess after the first month to address any concerns that may arise." "Seconded," Mr. Jenkins said quickly, perhaps eager to move past the uncomfortable moment he had created. "All in favor?" Mayor Wallace asked, raising his own hand. Dr. Lansing and Mr. Jenkins followed suit. After a moment's hesitation, Mrs. Holcomb grudgingly raised her hand as well. "Excellent," Mayor Wallace beamed. "Welcome officially to Ash Fork, Miss Adams. We look forward to seeing your methods in action." As the meeting concluded, Bridget gathered her papers, relief washing over her. The first hurdle had been cleared, though she harbored no illusions that Mrs. Holcomb would make her path easy. "Miss Adams," Nathan said as she turned to leave, "may I walk you back to the boarding house? I'm headed that direction." Mrs. Holcomb's eyebrows rose fractionally, but she said nothing as Bridget accepted the offer with a polite nod. Outside, the late afternoon sun had lost some of its intensity, casting long shadows across the dusty street. Nathan walked beside Bridget in companionable silence for several moments before speaking. "You handled that well," he said finally. "Especially Jenkins' thoughtless question." Bridget sighed. "It wasn't thoughtless, Deputy, just blunt, and it's a legitimate concern from their perspective. Many people assume that my size indicates laziness or lack of discipline, qualities no one wants in a teacher." Nathan frowned. "That's nonsense." "Perhaps," Bridget conceded, "but it's a prejudice I've faced my entire life. I've learned to address it directly rather than pretend it doesn't exist." They walked a few more steps in silence, then Nathan said, "You mentioned your father's academy. What did he teach?" The unexpected change of subject caught Bridget off guard, but she welcomed it. "Everything. He believed in a classical education, languages, mathematics, science, literature. But he was most passionate about history. He used to say that those who don't understand the past are doomed to repeat its mistakes." "Sounds like a wise man," He was. Bridget smiled at the memory. He believed education was the great equalizer that, with the right learning, anyone could rise above their circumstances. It's why he accepted students from all backgrounds, not just the wealthy families most academies courted. "And your mother?" Nathan asked gently. "She taught music and art." "She could coax beauty from the most reluctant student." Bridget's voice softened with nostalgia. They complemented each other perfectly, he with his love of facts and reason, she with her appreciation for beauty and emotion. They sound like extraordinary people. They were. Bridget swallowed against the sudden tightness in her throat. Their academy was small but respected. After they passed, the new owner had different priorities. Nathan's expression darkened. "You mentioned that yesterday. He dismissed you because of your appearance." "Not in those words, of course," Bridget said with a wry smile. "He said the academy was moving in a new direction and needed teachers who reflected its refined image. It was clear what he meant." "His loss," Nathan said firmly, "and Ash Fork's gain." They had reached the boarding house and Bridget paused at the bottom of the steps. "Thank you for your support at the meeting, Deputy. It was unexpected but appreciated." "Nathan," he corrected gently, "and no thanks needed. I only spoke the truth." The sincerity in his voice made her look up, meeting his gaze directly for perhaps the first time. What she saw there wasn't pity or polite interest, but something warmer, more genuine. For a moment, she allowed herself to wonder if perhaps Bridget, "There you are." Hannah's voice broke the moment as she appeared on the porch. "Mama sent me to find you. Dinner's almost ready, and she made her famous beef stew to celebrate your first day." "That's very kind of her," Bridget said, forcing her attention away from Nathan. "I'll be right in." Nathan tipped his hat to both women. "Ladies, enjoy your evening." As he walked away, Hannah leaned closer to Bridget, her eyes sparkling with youthful enthusiasm. "Deputy Finley walked you home again. Half the girls in town would trade places with you in a heartbeat." Bridget felt a flush creep up her neck. "It was merely a courtesy, Hannah. Nothing more." But as she followed the girl inside, Bridget couldn't quite convince herself that the warmth in Nathan's eyes had been merely courteous. And that realization was both thrilling and terrifying. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Bridget spent most of her waking hours at the schoolhouse, organizing books, preparing lessons, and creating colorful charts to hang on the previously bare walls. Several parents stopped by with their children, curious to meet the new teacher before classes officially began. Most were polite if reserved, sizing Bridget up with the directness common to frontier folk. The welcome supper on Saturday evening proved less intimidating than Bridget had feared. The church hall was packed with nearly every resident of Ash Fork, from infants to the elderly. Long tables groaned under the weight of potluck dishes, and the atmosphere was festive and welcoming. Bridget found herself surrounded by curious children and their parents, answering endless questions about Philadelphia, her teaching methods, and even her journey west. To her surprise, no one seemed to regard her size as noteworthy, or if they did, they had the courtesy not to mention it. Nathan arrived late, having been delayed by his deputy duties. Bridget tried not to notice how his eyes scanned the room until they found her, or how his face brightened when their gazes met. She certainly tried not to notice how handsome he looked in his clean shirt and vest, his dark hair still damp from what must have been a hasty washing. "Enjoying the festivities?" he asked, appearing at her side with a plate of food. "Very much," she replied truthfully. "Everyone has been most welcoming. Told you appearances matter less out here," he said with a smile. "Folk are more interested in what you can contribute." Before Bridget could respond, Mrs. Holcomb materialized beside them, her perpetual frown firmly in place. Deputy Finley, Sheriff Blackburn is looking for you. Something about the Wilkins boys causing trouble at the saloon again. Nathan sighed. Duty calls. Excuse me, ladies. With a regretful smile at Bridget, he departed, leaving her alone with Mrs. Holcomb. You should be cautious, Miss Adams, the older woman said once Nathan was out of earshot. A woman in your position cannot afford to invite gossip. Bridget stiffened. I wasn't aware that conversing with the deputy constituted inviting gossip, Mrs. Holcomb. Perhaps not in Philadelphia, Mrs. Holcomb replied, her tone making it clear what she thought of eastern cities. But in a small town like Ash Fork, such attentions are noted. Deputy Finley is well regarded in this community. The implication was clear. A man like Nathan was too good for a woman like Bridget. It was a familiar sentiment, one Bridget had encountered throughout her life. I appreciate your concern, Bridget said evenly. But I assure you Deputy Finley and I are merely acquaintances. His courtesy is extended to all newcomers, I'm sure, Mrs. Holcomb's thin lips curved in what might generously be called a smile. Of course, I merely thought to spare you any disappointment. With that parting barb, she moved away, leaving Bridget with a familiar ache in her chest. The rational part of her knew that Mrs. Holcomb was merely being cruel, but the insecure part, the part shaped by years of sidelong glances and whispered comments, couldn't help but wonder if the woman was right. What reason would a man like Nathan Finley have to look twice at her, when Ash Fork had no shortage of pretty, slender young women like Hannah? Bridget had seen the way some of them looked at him during the supper, with open admiration and availability. Sooner or later he would notice, and any fleeting interest he might have in the new schoolteacher would fade. Better to guard her heart now, Bridget decided, than to nurse foolish hopes that could only end in humiliation. Monday morning dawned clear and hot, as most mornings did in Ash Fork. Bridget arrived at the schoolhouse an hour before the children were due, wanting to ensure everything was perfect for her first official day of teaching. She wrote her name neatly on the blackboard, Miss Adams, and arranged her desk with the attendance ledger, lesson plans, and a small bell to call the class to order. At 8 o'clock, the children began to arrive, some walking alone from nearby homes, others dropped off by parents, and a few riding in on horseback from outlying ranches. They entered with varying degrees of enthusiasm, eyeing their new teacher with curiosity. By 8:15, 31 students occupied the desks, ranging from 6-year-old Tommy Baker, whose feet barely touched the floor, to 16-year-old James Wilson, a tall young man who looked as if he'd rather be anywhere else. Good morning, Bridget said, her voice clear and confident as she stood before them. I'm Miss Adams, your new teacher. 31 pairs of eyes stared back at her, some curious, some wary, some openly assessing her size with the unfiltered honesty of youth. Bridget had expected this and met their gazes with a warm smile. Before we begin our lessons, I'd like to learn a bit about each of you, she continued. When I call your name from the register, please stand and tell me one thing you hope to learn this year. The simple exercise served multiple purposes. It allowed Bridget to connect names with faces, gave her insight into each child's priorities, and most importantly, established from the outset that this classroom would be a place of participation and engagement, not passive learning. The children's responses ranged from the practical, I want to learn enough ciphering to help Pa with the ranch accounts, to the ambitious, I want to learn about the stars and planets, to the refreshingly honest, my ma said I have to learn to read or she'll tan my hide. By the time Bridget completed the role, the initial tension had eased. She divided the students into groups based on their current knowledge levels and set them to work on assessment exercises while she moved among them, offering help where needed and noting each child's strengths and challenges. The morning passed quickly, and when the lunch bell rang, Bridget felt a surge of satisfaction. Despite the challenges of teaching multiple grade levels simultaneously, the children had responded well to her methods. Even surly James Wilson had grudgingly completed his writing assignment, revealing a surprisingly elegant hand. As the children spilled out into the schoolyard with their lunch pails, Bridget sank into her chair, allowing herself a moment's rest. The morning's standing and constant movement had left her back aching, but the sense of accomplishment outweighed the physical discomfort. She was just unwrapping her own modest lunch when a knock at the door drew her attention. Nathan stood in the doorway, his familiar hat in his hands. "Hope I'm not interrupting," he said. "I was passing by and thought I'd see how your first morning went." "Very well, thank you," Bridget replied, her resolve to maintain a professional distance warring with the pleasure of seeing him. "The children are quite bright, if somewhat behind in their studies." Nathan entered the classroom, his eyes taking in the colorful charts and maps Bridget had hung on the walls. "Place looks different, warmer somehow." "A pleasant environment encourages learning," Bridget said, falling back on educational theory to mask her awareness of his presence. "Children respond better when their surroundings are stimulating but organized." Nathan smiled at her formal tone. "Is that what they taught you in teacher school, Miss Adams?" The teasing note in his voice made her lips twitch despite herself. "It's what experience has taught me, Deputy Finley." He chuckled, moving closer to examine a map of the Arizona territory that Bridget had carefully drawn and colored. "This is impressive work." "Thank you. The existing maps were outdated, and I thought the children should understand their own territory first before studying faraway places." Nathan nodded, tracing the outline of the Mogollon Rim with one finger. "Makes sense. Hard to care about Europe when you've never been beyond Prescott." "Exactly." Bridget found herself warming to the subject, her earlier resolve weakening. "Although I do believe in expanding their horizons through literature. Many of these children may never leave Arizona, but books can take them anywhere in the world or beyond it." "You really love teaching, don't you?" Nathan asked, his expression thoughtful. "I do," Bridget admitted. "There's nothing quite like watching a child grasp a new concept, that moment when confusion transforms into understanding. It's magical." Nathan's gaze softened, and for a moment, Bridget thought he might say something more personal. But the clanging of the school bell signaling the end of lunch break interrupted whatever he might have been about to express. "I should go," he said, replacing his hat. "Duty calls, but I'm glad your first day is going well." "Thank you for checking," Bridget replied, keeping her tone politely neutral despite the flutter in her chest. As Nathan left, the children began filing back into the classroom, their curious gazes following the deputy's departure. Bridget caught several of the older girls exchanging meaningful glances, and she felt a flush creeping up her neck. "Back to your seats, please," she said briskly, determined to redirect their attention. "This afternoon, we'll be discussing the formation of the Arizona Territory. Who can tell me what year it was established?" The afternoon passed without further interruption, and by the time Bridget dismissed the children at 3 o'clock, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction mingled with exhaustion. Her first day as Ash Fork schoolteacher had been a success by any measure. As the days turned into weeks, Bridget settled into a comfortable routine. Mornings at the schoolhouse, afternoons spent grading papers and preparing lessons, evenings at the boarding house, where she enjoyed the company of her fellow boarders. She attended Sunday services at Reverend Clark's church, joined the ladies' sewing circle, though her stitches remained imperfect, and gradually became a respected member of the community. Nathan remained a constant, if somewhat perplexing, presence in her life. He often found reasons to pass by the schoolhouse, sometimes bringing books or supplies donated by townspeople, other times simply stopping to inquire about her day. These brief encounters left Bridget both pleased and confused. Despite Mrs. Holcomb's warning, Nathan's attention showed no signs of waning, yet he made no overt gestures that might indicate anything beyond friendly interest. The first real test of Bridget's teaching abilities came in early October, when James Wilson, her oldest and most resistant student, failed to turn in an important history assignment. When confronted, the boy became belligerent. "Don't see the point in learning about dead people," he muttered, slouching in his seat. "Not gonna help me run cattle." Several of the younger children watched wide-eyed, sensing the challenge to Bridget's authority. She knew her response would set a precedent for how discipline would function in her classroom. "James," she said calmly, "please stay after class. The rest of you may go to lunch." When the room had emptied, Bridget sat at the desk beside James rather than looming over him from her teacher's position, a deliberate choice that seemed to surprise the boy. "Why are you really here, James?" she asked directly. "You're 16. You could be working full-time at your father's ranch. Yet you come to school every day even though you pretend to despise it. Why?" The question caught him off guard. He shifted uncomfortably, his surly expression faltering. "Pa says I need schooling, says he won't have an ignorant son running his ranch someday." Bridget nodded, understanding dawning. "And you're concerned that studying history is a waste of time that could be spent learning more practical skills." "Yes," James admitted. "What good does knowing about the Civil War do me? More than you might think," Bridget replied. "That war changed the cattle industry forever. Before the war, most beef cattle were raised in the East. After the war, with the railroads expanding west and eastern markets growing, the entire industry shifted to the Great Plains and territories like Arizona. The economic forces that war set in motion are the very reason your father's ranch exists as it does today." James looked up, genuine interest flickering in his eyes for perhaps the first time. "Really, really," Bridget confirmed. "History isn't just names and dates, James. It's understanding how the world came to be as it is and how it might change in the future. As a future rancher, wouldn't that knowledge be valuable?" The boy was silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Guess I never thought of it that way. I'd like to propose a compromise," Bridget said. "Complete the assignment, but focus specifically on how the war affected the cattle industry. Make it relevant to your interests." "You'd let me do that?" James asked, clearly surprised by the flexibility. "Education should be useful, James. My goal isn't to force you to memorize facts you'll forget, but to help you learn to think critically about the world around you." A reluctant smile tugged at the boy's lips. "All right, Miss Adams, I'll do it." The exchange marked a turning point in Bridget's relationship with her most difficult student. James never became enthusiastic about schooling, but he stopped his active resistance and occasionally even showed genuine engagement with his lessons. Word of the incident spread quickly through Ash Fork's efficient gossip network. At the next school board meeting, even Mrs. Holcomb was forced to acknowledge Bridget's successful handling of the situation. "We've had no further disciplinary issues reported," she admitted grudgingly. "And attendance has remained consistent." "More than consistent," Mayor Wallace corrected cheerfully. 3 new students have enrolled since Miss Adams began teaching. The Martinez family specifically mentioned her reputation for fairness as their reason for sending their children. Bridget accepted the praise with modest gratitude, though inwardly she glowed with pride. She had come to Ash Fork seeking acceptance and purpose, and it seemed she had found both. As autumn deepened, bringing marginally cooler temperatures to the Arizona desert, Ash Fork prepared for its annual harvest festival. Though the town's agricultural output was modest compared to lusher regions, the festival was an important community tradition, a chance to celebrate the year's hard work before winter set in. "You'll need a new dress," Mrs. Winters declared one evening at the boarding house dinner table. "Something festive. The harvest dance is our most important social event of the year." Bridget hesitated. "I'm not much of a dancer, Mrs. Winters." "Nonsense," the older woman dismissed. "Everyone dances at the harvest festival. I have some lovely fabric at the shop that would suit your coloring beautifully. A rich burgundy, perhaps." The thought of a new dress, especially one in a color as bold as burgundy, both tempted and terrified Bridget. In Philadelphia, she had always dressed conservatively in dark, slimming colors, trying desperately to minimize her size. The idea of drawing attention to herself with a vibrant color seemed almost scandalous. Yet Ash Fork had proven different from Philadelphia in so many ways. Here she was respected for her mind and her abilities, not judged for her appearance. Perhaps it was time to stop hiding. "I think burgundy sounds lovely," she said finally. Mrs. Winters beamed. "Excellent. Come by the shop tomorrow after school. We'll take your measurements." The following afternoon, Bridget found herself standing on a small platform in Mrs. Winters' millinery and dress shop, arms extended as the older woman took precise measurements. Despite Mrs. Winters' matter-of-fact approach, Bridget couldn't help feeling self-conscious as the measuring tape wrapped around her ample waist and bust. "You have a lovely figure, dear," Mrs. Winters commented, noting down numbers in a small notebook. "Full and womanly. We'll create a dress that celebrates those curves rather than hiding them." Bridget blinked in surprise. No one had ever described her figure as lovely before. "I thank you, Mrs. Winters." The older woman looked up, her experienced eyes seeing more than Bridget might have wished. "You've spent too long listening to fools who think beauty comes in only one size. Out here, we have more practical considerations. A woman with substance is a woman who can survive." The bell above the shop door jingled, interrupting the conversation. Bridget turned, still standing on the platform, to see Nathan entering the shop. He stopped short at the sight of her, his eyes widening slightly. "Pardon me, ladies," he said, quickly removing his hat. "I didn't mean to intrude." "Not at all, Deputy," Mrs. Winters replied cheerfully. "Miss Adams and I were just discussing her dress for the Harvest Festival. Did you need something?" "Just picking up those handkerchiefs you embroidered for the sheriff," Nathan said, his eyes darting to Bridget and then away, as if uncertain where to look while she stood displayed on the fitting platform. "Of course. I have them wrapped and ready." Mrs. Winters bustled behind the counter, leaving Bridget feeling uncomfortably exposed under Nathan's gaze. "I should step down," she murmured, reaching for her shawl to cover her measuring dress, a simple, form-fitting garment used for taking accurate measurements. "No need to stop on my account," Nathan said quickly. "I'll be gone in a moment." An awkward silence fell between them as Mrs. Winters rummaged through drawers behind the counter. Bridget clutched her shawl tighter, acutely aware of how the thin, measuring dress revealed every curve and roll of her body. "Will you be attending the festival, Deputy?" she asked, desperate to break the tension. "Wouldn't miss it," Nathan replied, his eyes meeting hers with unexpected warmth. "Best night of the year in Ash Fork." "I've never been to a proper frontier celebration," Bridget admitted. "In Philadelphia, social events were rather formal." "Nothing formal about our festival," Nathan said with a smile. "Good food, good music, and dancing under the stars." simple pleasures but genuine ones. "Here we are," Mrs. Winters exclaimed, emerging with a small package. "Please give Sheriff Blackburn my compliments." "Will do, madam." Nathan accepted the package, then glanced once more at Bridget. "Miss Adams, I look forward to seeing you at the festival." After he left, Mrs. Winters gave Bridget a knowing look that made her blush to the roots of her hair. "Well, well, it seems our deputy has an eye for substantive women after all." "Mrs. Winters, please," Bridget protested. "Deputy Finley is merely being courteous." The older woman raised a skeptical eyebrow but returned to her measurements without further comment. "We'll make this dress with a sweetheart neckline, I think. Show off those lovely shoulders of yours." Bridget opened her mouth to object, then closed it again. Perhaps it was time to stop hiding, to stop apologizing for the body she inhabited. Perhaps, just perhaps, it was time to believe that she deserved to feel beautiful, regardless of her size. "A sweetheart neckline sounds perfect," she said, straightening her shoulders with newfound confidence. The weeks leading up to the Harvest Festival were busy ones at the schoolhouse. Bridget organized a special program of recitations, songs, and historical tableaux for the children to perform at the festival. Each class worked diligently on their contribution, excited to showcase their learning for the entire town. James Wilson, to everyone's surprise, volunteered to narrate the historical portions of the program. When Bridget asked him about this unexpected enthusiasm, he shrugged with feigned nonchalance. "Figured if I'm going to learn this history stuff anyway, might as well show I'm good at it," he said, though Bridget suspected his real motivation might have more to do with impressing pretty Sophia Martinez, who would be playing Columbia in the tableau. The night before the festival, Bridget's burgundy dress was delivered to the boarding house. Mrs. Winters had outdone herself. The gown was a rich wine color that complemented Bridget's fair complexion and dark hair beautifully. The sweetheart neckline was modest yet flattering, showing just a hint of décolletage. The waist was empire style, accentuating Bridget's smallest point just beneath her full bust, while the skirt flowed gracefully to the floor in soft folds that moved elegantly when she walked. "Oh, Bridget," Hannah gasped when she saw the dress. "You look like a queen." Mrs. Garner clapped her hands in delight. "That color is perfect on you, my dear. You'll be the belle of the ball." Bridget turned slowly before the mirror in the parlor, hardly recognizing the woman who gazed back at her. For the first time in her adult life, she felt genuinely beautiful, not despite her size, but somehow because of it. The dress didn't hide her curves but celebrated them, transforming what she had always seen as flaws into assets. "You really think so?" she asked uncertainly. "Absolutely," Mrs. Winters said firmly. "Now let's discuss your hair. I think an updo with a few soft tendrils around your face would be perfect." The day of the festival dawned clear and crisp, as close to autumn weather as Arizona usually managed. The town square had been transformed overnight, with bunting and lanterns hanging from every available surface. Long tables lined one side, already laden with dishes brought by community members. A wooden platform had been constructed for the children's performances, and beside it, a space had been cleared for dancing, with bales of hay arranged around the perimeter for seating. Bridget spent the morning overseeing final rehearsals, then returned to the boarding house to prepare for the evening festivities. Mrs. Garner and Hannah helped her dress, the three women chattering excitedly as they worked together to create the promised updo, secured with tortoiseshell combs borrowed from Mrs. Winters. "There," Mrs. Garner said, stepping back to admire their handiwork. "Absolutely beautiful." Bridget hardly recognized her reflection. The woman in the mirror looked confident, radiant a far cry from the insecure newcomer who had arrived in Ash Fork just months ago. "Thank you both," she said sincerely. "I never thought I could look like this." "Nonsense," Mrs. Garner replied briskly. "You've always been beautiful, Bridget. You're just finally allowing yourself to see it." The festival was already in full swing when they arrived at the town square. Children ran laughing between the tables, older folks sat chatting in groups, and several couples twirled to the lively music provided by a small band of local musicians. Bridget felt eyes turning toward her as she entered, and for once, she didn't cringe from the attention. She held her head high, acknowledging the compliments that came her way with genuine smiles. "Miss Adams." Tommy Baker came running up to her, his face smeared with what appeared to be cherry pie filling. "Do we gotta do our show now?" Bridget laughed, pulling a handkerchief from her reticule to wipe his face. "Not quite yet, Tommy. Enjoy the festivities for another hour, then we'll gather by the platform." As Tommy raced off, Bridget became aware of a presence beside her. She turned to find Nathan, looking handsome in a clean white shirt, dark vest, and what appeared to be newly polished boots. He was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. "Miss Adams," he said finally, his voice slightly hoarse. "You look. That color suits you remarkably well." Bridget felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you, Deputy. You look quite handsome yourself." A silence fell between them, charged with something Bridget was afraid to name. Nathan seemed on the verge of saying something more when Mrs. Holcomb's voice cut through the moment. "Miss Adams, there you are. The school board members are gathering for the official welcome. Your presence is required." With an apologetic smile at Nathan, Bridget allowed herself to be led away, though she remained acutely aware of his gaze following her through the crowd. The children's program was a resounding success. Each performance was met with enthusiastic applause from the assembled townsfolk, with James Wilson's confident narration drawing particular praise. When the final tableau concluded, Mayor Wallace stepped forward to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we can all agree that our children have never been in better hands. Let's show our appreciation for the woman who has transformed our school in just a few short months, Miss Bridget Adams." The applause that followed was deafening. Parents who had once been hesitant about sending their children to school now beamed at Bridget with genuine gratitude. Even Mrs. Holcomb managed a tight smile and a nod of acknowledgement. As the formal portion of the evening concluded and the dancing began in earnest, Bridget found herself surrounded by well-wishers. Parents thanked her for their children's progress. Fellow teachers from neighboring towns asked about her methods, and several of Ash Fork's eligible bachelors hinted at interest in a dance. Bridget accepted a few of these invitations, surprising herself with how much she enjoyed the simple pleasure of movement to music. She had always avoided dancing in Philadelphia, certain that her size would make her appear ungainly. But here, amidst the unpretentious joy of a frontier celebration, no one seemed to notice or care that she occupied more space than the slender young women who also graced the dance floor. She was resting between dances, fanning herself in the cool evening air when Nathan appeared before her once more. "May I have this dance, Miss Adams?" he asked, extending his hand. The musicians had just struck up a slower tune, a waltz that would require closer contact than the lively reels Bridget had danced thus far. She hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "I'm not sure I remember the steps to a waltz," she demurred. "It's simple enough," Nathan replied, his hand still outstretched. "Just follow my lead." Something in his steady gaze gave Bridget courage. She placed her hand in his and allowed him to lead her to the dance floor. Nathan's hand at her waist was warm and sure as he guided her into the first steps of the waltz. Bridget was acutely conscious of how her substantial body must feel beneath his touch, but if he found her size troubling, his expression gave no hint of it. Instead, his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You've transformed this town, you know," he said as they moved together to the music. Bridget blinked in surprise. "I've done no such thing. I'm just teaching children." "It's more than that," Nathan insisted. "You've brought something fresh to Ash Fork, a belief that everyone has value, that everyone can learn and grow. Even cranky old Jenkins is talking about taking up reading again, thanks to you." Bridget laughed. "Mr. Jenkins is hardly old." "Missing the point, Miss Adams," Nathan said with a smile that creased the corners of his eyes. "You've made an impression here, a good one." The simple words, spoken with such evident sincerity, touched Bridget deeply. She had come to Ash Fork seeking only acceptance, a place where she might be judged by her abilities rather than her appearance. She had never expected to make a meaningful difference in people's lives. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than you know." As they continued to dance, Bridget became aware of curious glances from the townsfolk around them. Some, like Mrs. Garner and Reverend Clark, wore approving smiles. Others, particularly several young women who had clearly set their caps for the handsome deputy, looked less pleased. And Mrs. Holcomb, watching from beside the refreshment table, wore an expression of undisguised disapproval. The awareness of these observers broke the spell of the moment. Bridget stiffened slightly, pulling back from Nathan's embrace. "Perhaps we should stop," she murmured. "People are talking." Nathan's brow furrowed. "Let them talk. I'm dancing with the prettiest woman at the festival. Why should I care what anyone thinks about that?" The compliment, delivered with such matter-of-fact conviction, left Bridget speechless. Before she could formulate a response, the music ended, and couples around them began to applaud the musicians. "Would you like some punch?" Nathan asked, seemingly unaware of the tumult he had created within her. Yes, thank you," Bridget managed, her thoughts whirling. As Nathan moved toward the refreshment table, Bridget found herself cornered by Mrs. Holcomb. "A word of advice, Miss Adams," the older woman said, her voice low and sharp. "Don't make a spectacle of yourself. Deputy Finley is being kind, nothing more. Men like him don't seriously court women like you." The cruel words struck home with devastating precision, giving voice to Bridget's deepest insecurities. Of course Nathan was just being kind. Of course he couldn't genuinely be attracted to her. Men like him, handsome, respected, desired by every eligible woman in town, did not choose women of Bridget's size and plain features. "Excuse me," Bridget murmured, turning away before Mrs. Holcomb could see the hurt in her eyes. "I need some air." She slipped through the crowd and away from the town square, seeking the quiet darkness beyond the festival lights. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back fiercely. She would not cry. Not here, not over words that merely stated what she had always known to be true. "Bridget." Nathan's voice came from behind her. "Are you all right?" She turned to find him standing a few paces away, holding 2 cups of punch and wearing a concerned expression. "I'm fine," she lied, forcing a smile. "Just needed a moment away from the noise." Nathan studied her face in the dim light, clearly not believing her. "What did Mrs. Holcomb say to you?" Bridget blinked in surprise. "How did you—" "I saw her corner you," he said grimly. "And I know that look on her face. She was up to no good." Bridget sighed, suddenly weary of pretense. "She merely reminded me of certain realities, Deputy. Nothing I didn't already know." Nathan set the cups down on a nearby barrel and moved closer. "What realities would those be?" "Please don't make me say it," Bridget said quietly. "It's humiliating enough without repeating it." She told you I was just being kind, didn't she? Nathan asked, his voice tight with anger. That a man like me wouldn't seriously be interested in a woman like you. Bridget's silence was answer enough. Look at me, Bridget, he said, his tone gentler now. When she reluctantly raised her eyes to his, he continued, Martha Holcomb doesn't speak for me. No one does. And she has no idea what I think or feel. It's all right, Nathan, Bridget said, summoning her dignity. You don't need to spare my feelings. I've lived with this body all my life. I know what men see when they look at me. Do you? He challenged. Because I don't think you have any idea what I see when I look at you. Before Bridget could respond, Nathan took her hands in his touch warm and sure. I see a woman of extraordinary courage who traveled alone across the country to build a new life. I see a teacher who believes in every child, who makes even the most resistant student want to learn. I see a woman whose smile lights up a room, whose laugh makes people want to laugh with her. He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. And yes, I see a woman whose curves make my heart beat faster, whose beautiful face has haunted my dreams since the moment I first saw her step down from that stagecoach. Bridget stared at him in shock, unable to believe what she was hearing. You can't mean that. I have never meant anything more in my life, Nathan replied firmly. I've been trying to find the courage to tell you for weeks. I thought I feared you might not welcome my attention. That perhaps you saw me as just another frontier cowboy without the education and refinement you were accustomed to. A bubble of hysterical laughter rose in Bridget's throat. You were worried about not being good enough for me. Is that so hard to believe? Nathan asked, his expression genuinely puzzled. Yes, Bridget exclaimed. Look at me, Nathan. I've never been the kind of woman men desire, especially not men who could have any woman they wanted. Nathan's eyes darkened with an emotion Bridget couldn't name. Then you've known the wrong kind of men, Bridget Adams. And before she could respond, he leaned forward and kissed her. The kiss was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. But when Bridget, after a moment of shocked stillness, responded with a small sound of wonder, Nathan deepened the kiss, pulling her closer with a fervor that left no doubt about his desire. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Bridget felt as though the world had shifted on its axis. Everything she had believed about herself, about what was possible for a woman of her size, had been upended by the unmistakable passion in Nathan's kiss. I don't understand, she whispered. Nathan smiled, tucking a stray tendril of hair behind her ear with a tenderness that made her heart ache. What don't you understand, Bridget? That I find you beautiful. That I've been falling in love with you since the day you arrived. Love. The word emerged as barely more than a breath. Yes, love, Nathan confirmed. I know it's sudden and I don't expect you to return the feeling. But I won't have you believing that my attention is mere kindness or pity. What I feel for you is neither of those things. Bridget searched his face in the moonlight, looking for any sign of insincerity or mockery. She found only open honesty and a vulnerability that matched her own. I'm afraid, she admitted softly. Of what? Nathan asked, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. Of believing this is real, only to wake up and discover it was a dream. Of trusting that you truly see me, all of me, and want me anyway. Nathan's expression softened with understanding. Then I'll just have to prove it to you day by day, for as long as it takes. He drew her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent shivers down her spine. Starting tomorrow, if you'll allow me to call on you properly. Bridget found herself nodding, a smile spreading across her face despite her lingering doubts. I would like that very much. They returned to the festival separately, though the knowing looks they received suggested their absence had been noted. Bridget found she didn't care. For the first time in her life, she felt beautiful. Desired not despite her size but somehow inclusive of it, as if her generous curves were part of the woman Nathan had declared feelings for, not an obstacle to be overlooked. As the festival wound down and families began to drift homeward, Bridget found herself surrounded by her students, all eager to tell her how much they had enjoyed their performances and how nice she looked in her burgundy dress. "You look like a princess, Miss Adams," little Emma Thompson declared, her eyes wide with admiration. "Thank you, Emma," Bridget replied, touched by the child's sincerity. "That's a lovely compliment." "Deputy Finley thinks so too," James Wilson said with the knowing smirk of a teenager. "He couldn't take his eyes off you all night." "James Wilson," Bridget exclaimed, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "That's quite enough of that." The boy grinned unrepentantly and sauntered off, leaving Bridget flustered but secretly pleased that Nathan's interest had been so obvious even a 16-year-old boy had noticed it. As she walked back to the boarding house with Mrs. Garner and Hannah, Bridget found her thoughts returning to Nathan's kiss, to the feeling of being truly desired for the first time in her life. It seemed impossible, yet the memory of his lips on hers, of the passion in his eyes, could not be denied. "You and Deputy Finley seem to be enjoying each other's company," Mrs. Garner commented with studied casualness as they reached the boarding house porch. "He's asked permission to call on me," Bridget admitted, unable to keep the wonder from her voice. Hannah squealed with delight, clapping her hands together. "Oh, Bridget, how romantic!" Mrs. Garner's smile was more measured but no less pleased. "He's a good man, Bridget, one of the best in Ash Fork." "Yes," Bridget agreed softly. "I'm beginning to see that." That night, as Bridget prepared for bed, carefully hanging the burgundy dress that had somehow changed everything, she found herself humming the waltz she had danced with Nathan. For the first time since arriving in Ash Fork, perhaps for the first time in her adult life, she allowed herself to imagine a future that included not just professional fulfillment but personal happiness as well. True to his word, Nathan called at the boarding house the following afternoon. Mrs. Garner showed him to the parlor, where Bridget waited with a mixture of anticipation and lingering disbelief. He had brought flowers, not a formal bouquet from a florist, but wildflowers he had clearly gathered himself, their stems wrapped in a damp handkerchief to keep them fresh. "I thought we might go for a walk," he suggested. "It's a fine day, and I'd like to show you something outside of town." With Mrs. Garner's smiling approval, Bridget set out with Nathan, the wildflowers carefully placed in a vase on the parlor table. He led her to where his horse was tethered at the hitching post. "It's a bit of a ride," he explained. "I hope you don't mind sharing a saddle." Bridget hesitated, sudden anxiety flooding her. "I'm not sure your horse can carry us both." Understanding dawned in Nathan's eyes. "Thunder here is the strongest gelding in the county. He carries me and a full load of supplies up into the mountains regularly. Trust me, he can manage us just fine for a short ride." Still, Bridget hung back. "I've never ridden double. I'm not sure I know how." With gentle patience, Nathan helped her mount, then swung up behind her. His arms came around her to take the reins, creating a secure circle that made Bridget acutely aware of their physical closeness. "Comfortable?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. Bridget nodded, not trusting her voice. She was hyper-conscious of her body pressed against his, of the way her substantial hips and backside must feel against his lean frame. Yet Nathan showed no sign of discomfort, quite the contrary. He seemed perfectly content to hold her close, as Thunder carried them out of town and into the surrounding countryside. They rode for perhaps 20 minutes, following a narrow trail that wound through mesquite and cactus. Finally, they crested a small rise, and Nathan drew Thunder to a halt. "This is what I wanted to show you," he said, dismounting and reaching up to help Bridget down. Below them stretched a view of the valley that cradled Ash Fork. From this elevation, the town looked like a collection of toy buildings, nestled among the rugged beauty of the Arizona landscape. The late afternoon sun bathed everything in golden light, turning the distant mountains purple and the scrubland a dozen shades of amber and rust. "It's breathtaking," Bridget said softly, genuinely moved by the wild beauty of the scene. "I come here sometimes when I need perspective," Nathan said, standing beside her. "When town problems seem overwhelming or people are being particularly difficult. The view reminds me that we're all just small parts of something much larger." Bridget glanced at him, touched by this glimpse into his inner life. "Thank you for sharing it with me." They stood in companionable silence for several moments, simply absorbing the panorama before them. Then Nathan turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. "I meant what I said last night, Bridget, about my feelings for you." Bridget met his gaze, still scarcely able to believe that this man, this handsome, kind, respected man, could truly desire her. "I'm still not sure I understand why. There are so many prettier women in Ash Fork." Nathan shook his head, a hint of frustration crossing his features. "I don't want those women, I want you." He took her hands in his touch gentle but firm. "I've known many kinds of women in my life, Bridget. Slender ones, beautiful ones by conventional standards. None of them have moved me the way you do." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "After Sarah and the baby died, I thought that part of me was gone forever. I didn't expect to feel this way again, this alive, this drawn to another person. But from the moment I saw you step down from that stagecoach, something in me recognized something in you." "What?" Bridget asked, barely above a whisper. "Courage," Nathan said simply. "The kind of courage it takes to start over in a strange place. The kind of courage it takes to face a world that isn't always kind and still approach it with an open heart." His voice softened. "The same kind of courage I've been trying to find in myself." The raw honesty in his voice touched Bridget deeply. This wasn't flattery or empty words, this was a man sharing his truth, making himself as vulnerable as he was asking her to be. "I feel it too," she admitted, the words freeing something long caged within her. "This connection between us. I've been afraid to trust it, afraid to believe that someone like you could truly want someone like me." "Someone like me," Nathan repeated, a sad smile tugging at his lips. "Bridget, I'm just a man who lost his way for a while. A frontier deputy with dirt under his nails and not much to offer a woman of your education and refinement." Bridget stared at him in astonishment. "Is that really how you see yourself?" "It's what I am," he said simply. "No," Bridget said, finding her voice. "You're the man who helped a stranger with her heavy trunks without being asked. You're the man who defends children's right to education even against powerful forces like Mrs. Holcomb. You're the man who sees beauty in this harsh landscape and finds perspective when others would see only emptiness." She took a deep breath, drawing courage from the hope kindling in his eyes. "You're the man I've been falling in love with since the day I arrived, though I never dared believe you might feel the same." The words hung in the air between them, more frightening and more exhilarating than anything Bridget had ever said. For a moment, Nathan simply stared at her, as if he couldn't quite believe what he had heard. Then slowly, a smile spread across his face, not the polite smile he wore in town, but something wilder, more joyful. "Say it again," he requested, his voice rough with emotion. Bridget smiled, feeling a weight lifting from her heart. "I'm falling in love with you, Nathan Finley." This time when he kissed her, there was no hesitation, no careful restraint. He gathered her into his arms with a fervor that left no doubt of his desire, and Bridget responded in kind. allowing herself perhaps for the first time in her life to express her passion without shame or fear of rejection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Nathan rested his forehead against hers, his hand still warm and secure at her waist. "Marry me, Bridget." The words were so unexpected that Bridget pulled back, certain she had misheard. "What?" "Marry me," Nathan repeated, his eyes serious but alight with hope. "I know it's sudden. I know we haven't courted properly, but I've lived through enough loss to know that when you find happiness, you shouldn't waste time questioning it." Bridget stared at him, her heart pounding. "Nathan, we barely know each other." "I know enough," he insisted. "I know you're kind and brave and brilliant with children. I know you love books and history and have strong opinions about both. I know you bite your lower lip when you're thinking hard, and your eyes crinkle at the corners when you're truly amused." His voice softened. "I know I want to spend the rest of my life learning everything else there is to know about you." Tears pricked at Bridget's eyes, not of sorrow but of overwhelming joy. Never in her most hopeful moments had she imagined that coming to Ash Fork would lead to this, to being truly seen and wanted by a man like Nathan Finley. "Yes," she whispered, the word emerging with the force of absolute certainty. "Yes, I'll marry you." The smile that spread across Nathan's face was like sunrise breaking over the desert, warm and bright and full of promise. He lifted her off her feet in an exuberant embrace, spinning her around until they were both laughing with the pure, uncomplicated happiness of the moment. As the sun began to set over the Arizona landscape, painting the sky in vivid strokes of orange and pink, Bridget and Nathan mounted Thunder once more for the ride back to town. This time, Bridget felt no anxiety about her weight or her size, only a deep contentment as she settled against Nathan's chest, his arms secure around her. Their return to Ash Fork caused quite a stir. News of their engagement spread through town with the speed only possible in a small community where everyone's business was everyone else's entertainment. Reactions were mixed. Many, like Mrs. Garner and Reverend Clark, expressed genuine delight. Others, particularly some of the young women who had set their caps for Nathan, were visibly disappointed. And Mrs. Holcomb made her disapproval clear with tight-lipped silence whenever the couple was mentioned. But Bridget found that she cared less about these reactions than she might have expected. The joy of being loved, truly loved, for exactly who and what she was, overshadowed any lingering concern about others' opinions. They set the wedding date for Christmas Eve, giving them just enough time for proper preparations while honoring Nathan's desire not to wait too long. In the weeks that followed, Bridget continued teaching while also helping Nathan renovate the small house he owned at the edge of town. It had fallen into disrepair after Sarah's death, when Nathan had moved into rooms above the sheriff's office, unable to face the memories the house contained. "Are you sure you want to live here?" Bridget asked gently as they stood in what would be their bedroom, the walls freshly whitewashed, but still bearing the faint outline of a crib that had once stood in the corner. "We could build new, or buy the Peterson place. They're moving to Prescott next month." Nathan was quiet for a moment, his hand resting on the wall where the crib had been. "I think Sarah would like knowing the house has life in it again," he said finally. "She always said a home should be filled with love and laughter. It's been silent too long." Bridget moved to his side, slipping her hand into his. "Then we'll fill it with both." As word of their engagement spread beyond Ash Fork to neighboring communities, Bridget received an unexpected letter from Philadelphia, from Mr. Harrington, the man who had purchased her father's academy and subsequently dismissed her. "He offers me my position back," she told Nathan one evening as they sat on the porch of what would soon be their home. Apparently, Several of the academy's most prominent families withdrew their daughters when they learned I had been let go. They're now demanding my return as a condition of re-enrollment. Nathan studied her face in the gathering twilight. Are you considering it? Not for a moment, Bridget replied without hesitation. My life is here now, with you, with my students. She smiled, touching the simple gold band Nathan had placed on her finger, not an elaborate engagement ring, but his mother's wedding band, sent from Kansas when he wrote to tell his family of his impending marriage. Besides, his letter makes it clear he still doesn't understand why I was valuable to the academy. He writes that he's willing to overlook my unfortunate appearance given my undeniable intellectual qualifications. Nathan's expression darkened. The man's a fool. A common enough failing, Bridget said with a laugh, leaning against his shoulder. But not one I need to subject myself to anymore. The weeks leading up to Christmas passed in a blur of activity. The schoolhouse was decorated with paper chains and pine boughs, and Bridget organized a Christmas pageant that had the entire town talking. Her students, now devoted to their teacher, threw themselves into preparations for both the pageant and the wedding, which had become linked in their minds as a single grand celebration. Mrs. Winters and a committee of ladies from the sewing circle insisted on making Bridget's wedding dress an elegant creation of ivory satin with delicate lace trim. When Bridget protested that white was impractical for a frontier wedding, Mrs. Winters overruled her firmly. Every bride deserves to feel like a princess on her wedding day, the older woman declared. Besides, it's not as if you'll be traipsing through muddy streets. The church will be spotless. We're seeing to that personally. The dress, when completed, was the most beautiful garment Bridget had ever owned. Unlike her burgundy festival dress, which had embraced her curves with bold confidence, the wedding gown was a study in elegant simplicity. The high neckline and long sleeves were modestly appropriate for a winter wedding, while the empire waistline and flowing skirt flattered her figure without emphasizing or hiding it. "Oh, Bridget," Hannah sighed when she saw the completed dress. "You look like an angel." "Nathan won't know what hit him," Mrs. Garner agreed with a wink that made Bridget blush to the roots of her hair. Christmas Eve arrived with a rare dusting of snow, just enough to transform Ash Fork into a scene from a holiday card, with white-tipped cactus and frosted storefronts. The church was decorated with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and dozens of candles that filled the space with warm, golden light. As Bridget prepared in a small room at the back of the church, surrounded by Hannah, Mrs. Garner, and Mrs. Winters, she felt a curious sense of calm. The nervousness she had expected, the doubts and insecurities that had been her companions for so long, were notably absent. In their place was a quiet certainty that this day, this man, this life she was choosing were exactly right. "It's time, dear Mrs. Winters said, adjusting the simple veil that adorned Bridget's dark hair. "Are you ready?" Bridget nodded, her heart full, "more than I've ever been for anything." The small church was packed to capacity, with every resident of Ash Fork in attendance, and even some visitors from neighboring towns who had braved the winter roads to witness the union of the beloved schoolteacher and the respected deputy. As the first notes of music filled the air played by Mrs. Clark on the church's wheezy pump organ, a hush fell over the congregation. Bridget stood at the back of the church, her arm linked through Reverend Clark's, who had offered to give her away in her father's absence. Through her veil, she could see Nathan waiting at the altar, his tall figure straight and proud in his best suit, his eyes fixed on the doorway through which she would appear. "Ready, my dear?" Reverend Clark asked softly. Bridget smiled, squeezing his arm gently. "Yes, Reverend, I'm ready." The congregation rose as Bridget began her walk down the aisle. She was aware of the smiles, the whispered comments about how beautiful she looked, the few damp eyes among the ladies of the sewing circle. But mostly, she was aware of Nathan, of his face as it transformed with joy and wonder as she drew near. When she reached the altar and Reverend Clark placed her hand in Nathan's, Bridget felt a sense of homecoming so profound it brought tears to her eyes. This was where she belonged. This was the man she was meant to find. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion and sacred words. Bridget and Nathan had chosen traditional vows, finding comfort in the time-honored promises that generations of couples had made before them. When Nathan slipped the simple gold band onto her finger to join his mother's ring, his hand was steady, his eyes clear with certainty. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Clark declared with evident satisfaction. "Nathan, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was brief but tender, mindful of the church setting and the many eyes upon them. But in that brief touch of lips, Bridget felt all the promise of deeper intimacies to come, of a lifetime of being loved fully and without reservation. The celebration that followed at the town hall was joyous and uncomplicated. Long tables groaned beneath the weight of dishes contributed by every household in Ash Fork. Children ran laughing between the adults, high on excitement and Christmas anticipation. Even Mrs. Holcomb unbent enough to offer a stiffly polite congratulation to the newlyweds before taking her leave early. As the evening progressed, Bridget found a moment of quiet to slip outside, needing a breath of fresh air after the warmth and noise of the celebration. The night was clear and cold, stars blazing in the black sky with a brilliance only the desert could offer. "Everything all right?" Nathan's voice came from behind her as he followed her onto the porch. Bridget turned with a smile, holding out her hand to him. "Everything is perfect. I just needed a moment to take it all in." He came to stand beside her, wrapping an arm around her waist and drawing her close against the December chill. Having second thoughts about marrying a dusty deputy, the teasing question held a hint of genuine uncertainty that touched Bridget's heart. Even now, it seemed, Nathan harbored his own insecurities about their match. "Not for a single second," she assured him, turning in his arms to face him fully. "Marrying you is the easiest, most natural decision I've ever made." The relief in his eyes was swiftly replaced by a heat that made Bridget's breath catch. "Good," he murmured, lowering his head to hers, "because I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." This kiss was different from the chaste one they had shared in the church, deeper, more urgent, a promise of the night to come. Bridget responded with equal fervor, her arms twining around his neck as she gave herself over to the sensation of being desired, being loved. The sound of the town hall door opening forced them apart, though Nathan kept one arm firmly around Bridget's waist as they turned to face the interruption. "There you are," Mrs. Garner exclaimed. "It's time for the bridal dance. Everyone's waiting." With a shared smile of mingled amusement and anticipation, Bridget and Nathan followed her back inside, where the furniture had been pushed back to create a dance floor. The musicians struck up a waltz, the same one they had danced to at the Harvest Festival, and Nathan led Bridget into the center of the floor. As they moved together to the familiar melody, Bridget was struck by how far they had both come since that first dance. Then, she had been afraid to believe in the possibility of Nathan's interest. Now, she moved in his arms with the confidence of a woman who knew beyond doubt that she was loved, desired, chosen. "Happy Mrs. Finley," Nathan murmured, his breath warm against her ear. The new name sent a shiver of delight through Bridget. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she replied truthfully. Later that night, As they lay tangled together in the bed of what was now their home, Bridget marveled at the unexpected path her life had taken. She had come to Ash Fork seeking only independence and respect. She had found those things, yes, but also so much more: a community that valued her, students who adored her, and a man who loved her completely, without reservation or condition. "What are you thinking about?" Nathan asked, his voice lazy with contentment as he trailed his fingers along the curve of her hip. "About how differently this all might have turned out," Bridget replied honestly. "If you hadn't been the one to help me with my trunks that first day, if Mrs. Holcomb had succeeded in turning the school board against me. If I had listened to all the voices, including my own, that said a woman like me couldn't be loved the way you love me." Nathan propped himself up on one elbow, his expression serious in the moonlight that filtered through the window. "You've spent too long letting others define your worth, Bridget. Your size, your appearance, they're part of you, but they don't define you. Just as being a deputy doesn't define me." He touched her face gently, his calloused fingers tracing the curve of her cheek. "What defines us are the choices we make, the love we give, the difference we make in the world around us. By those measures, you are the most beautiful, valuable woman I have ever known." Tears filled Bridget's eyes at the simple truth in his voice. "I love you, Nathan Finley," she whispered. "More than I have words to express." "Then show me," he suggested with a smile that made her heart race. "We have all night and a lifetime after that." And she did, letting her body speak what words could not fully convey: her gratitude, her joy, her absolute certainty that in his arms she had found her true home. The years that followed brought changes to Ash Fork and to the Finleys. The railroad expanded, bringing more settlers and businesses to the once sleepy town. The schoolhouse grew to accommodate the increasing number of students, eventually requiring an additional teacher, a position filled by Hannah Garner after Bridget tutored her to pass the necessary examinations. Nathan was eventually elected sheriff when Blackburn retired, a position he filled with the same quiet competence he brought to everything he did. Mrs. Holcomb finally resigned from the school board after a disagreement with the town council over curriculum, allowing for more progressive educational approaches that Bridget had long advocated. And in the spring of 1881, just over 2 years after their wedding, Bridget and Nathan welcomed their first child, a robust son they named William Thomas Finley, after both their fathers. Will was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Elizabeth Sarah, whose dark hair and serious gray eyes were the image of her father's. Through it all, through the challenges of frontier life and the joys of building a family together, Bridget never forgot the lesson she had learned that first year in Ash Fork. That true beauty, true worth, came not from conforming to others' expectations, but from living authentically and loving wholeheartedly. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their now expanded home watching their children play in the yard, Nathan presented Bridget with a small wooden box. Inside was a delicate gold locket. "Open it," he urged when she looked at him questioningly. Inside was a tiny scrap of paper, carefully preserved. Bridget recognized it immediately, the advertisement for a teacher in Arizona Territory that had brought her to Ash Fork all those years ago. "I found it among your things when we were first married," Nathan explained. "Kept meaning to frame it, but this seemed more fitting somehow." Bridget touched the fragile paper with reverent fingers. "It changed everything," she murmured. "Not everything," Nathan corrected, drawing her close. "You were always meant to be loved, Bridget. If not by me, then by someone wise enough to see what I see when I look at you." Bridget smiled, leaning into his embrace as they watched Will chasing a butterfly across the yard, Elizabeth toddling determinedly after her brother. "I'm glad it was you," she said simply. Nathan pressed a kiss to her temple, his arms tightening around her substantial frame with the same appreciation he had shown from the very beginning. "So am I, my love, so am I." And as the Arizona sun set behind the distant mountains, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber, Bridget Finley knew with absolute certainty that she had found exactly where and with whom she belonged. Not despite who she was, but because of it. Completely, unconditionally, and without reservation,